It looks like you'll need to take out a pen and a clean sheet of paper. Got that? Question 1. Write a paragraph describing your most recent holiday using the words epistemology, phenomenography, interdisciplinarity in the paragraph. You must also use the definite article. Well, Marcia did warn you you're going to have a test, and this is it. Come on. There are other questions, but I think not. What I'd prefer to talk to you about today are two frontier issues, and provide you with two frameworks for you to think about those issues. The first of them is to do with the scholarship of teaching and learning, and more particularly asking the question that it may not be the same as research, and how might they be different and how might they be related. So I'd like to address that issue. The second one really is research-led teaching. What is it, and is it a part of the scholarship of teaching and learning, and do these questions matter? So that's where I'm going to go in this brief presentation. The reason I want to talk about this is that when Boyer first talked about the 4 scholarships of teaching, which I'll come to in a moment, he advocated 4 reasons why we should look at the scholarship of teaching and learning. Actually, all he did was ask to look at the scholarship of teaching. Learning wasn't in the equation at the time. But the main reason for looking at the scholarship of teaching and learning was as a way of raising the status of teaching, because research had prominence in most of the sorts of universities that are research-led. Teaching was considered to be a poor relation. So he thought by calling all sorts of things scholarship of teaching, scholarship of discovery, that this might be a way of raising the status or making them more equal. The second reason was a means through which teachers may come to teach more knowledgeably. The third was a means through which the quality of teaching may be assessed. And the fourth, and for me the most important, a way to enhance the student's experience of learning. Now, what I'd like you to do is, if you think the scholarship of teaching and learning is about research into the university teaching and learning, ask yourself whether the purposes of the scholarship of teaching and learning are met by that conjunction. In other words, if you call the scholarship of teaching and learning research into teaching and learning, how does that raise the status of teaching? All you're doing is saying research is more important, let's apply it to our teaching. That doesn't raise the status of teaching in my mind, it loses the point. A means through which teachers may come to teach more knowledgeably, yes, I accept that if you do research into teaching and learning, it probably does lead to teachers becoming more knowledgeable. But if teaching is about student learning, is it really about our students? It may be for those further down the track, but not for those that we're currently teaching or about to teach next semester, not in most cases. A means through which the quality of teaching may be assessed, well, possibly, but would you want to be assessed as a teacher on the basis of your publications in teaching? I doubt it. There are very few people that are. And finally, as a way to enhance student experience of learning, well, yes, as I've said, it's possible that investigating or doing research into teaching may lead to the enhancement of the experience of learning, but probably not immediately when those students are looking for it. So very interesting. I'd like to move on to something more interesting. I'll try to get rid of that and see if the person from the back hurries down the front. No. So moving right on, I'd like to look at something a little bit more different than considering the scholarship of teaching and learning as being research. I don't think it is only that. I think it's a part of what's going on, but it's not the whole lot. So in order to get where I want to go, I need to define what scholarship is. And the first part of that is to pick up some work on a colleague from the University of New South Wales who's long gone now in terms of work. But he defined scholarly work in this way, that it was something we engage in with academic rigour, integrity, honesty. And we're open-minded about it. We're sceptical about what's going on, and it has an element of humility about it. That's scholarly work, but that could happen in a garret, in a room at the top of a quadrangle. It could happen in a log cabin retreat. It doesn't have to be something that the rest of the world knows about. That process can be a private one, and for many people it is. Many of us know wonderful scholars whose work never sees the light of day. Scholarship takes it a step further. Scholarship, for me, is taking that process of the scholarly, honest, integrity-based work into the public arena for scrutiny by our peers. It's when it goes through that process that it becomes part of a wider set of knowledge, and some of the strange things that people do in their scholarly work in their garrets sees the light of day and gets questioned. the last part of this is to make transparent the processes that we're using when we engage in those scholarly activities. Now, that's a definition of scholarship that for me applies to all of our work. It applies to our research, but it also applies to our teaching. We can engage in teaching in a scholarly way when we take our thinking about teaching into the public arena. We're engaged in the scholarship of teaching because our peers are commenting on that. But they're not necessarily commenting on our scholarship of discovery. They're commenting, for me, on the processes we use to make learning possible. And that's what I'm going to get to in a few moments. So Boyer's 4 scholarships, what he saw were there's 3 things that he saw, 4 things that had equal status. And we'll get to there through this process. That these scholarships are all forms of scholarship, but they overlap in their domains. And I'm going to focus in this talk just on the teaching domain and the discovery domain. The integration is about synthesizing discovery. The application is more about consultancy, those sorts of things. So, if we look at just teaching, what is a scholarship of teaching? Well, I'm saying, and this is one definition of teaching, if teaching is about making learning possible, then the scholarship of teaching is about making transparent how learning is made possible. What is it that you draw on from your experience, from the literature, from your colleagues, that enables you to think that when you're engaging in a practice of teaching, that you think learning will be possible from that act? What is it that Graham Gibbs said on the first day about assessment that made you think if I applied that, then it might enhance learning? So if you have those ideas and you link them to the literature and you link them to experience and you link them to your colleagues' work, then, and you make that transparent in a session like this, then for me, you're engaging in the scholarship of teaching. Now, there are other definitions, and you can apply them yourself. My former colleague said, for her, teaching is about collaborative meaning-making. Well, same thing applies. Then the scholarship of teaching is about making transparent how collaborative meaning-making is happening. So whatever your definition of it is, it's showing that process to others. It isn't necessarily showing your discoveries about aspects of teaching to others. It's the practice of teaching, which is what differs the scholarship of teaching from the scholarship of discovery. And for me, that's what's important, because that's where the students benefit most. So, an example, making transparent how learning has been made possible, for example, discussing, reflecting, describing in an informed and literature-based scholarly way what happened and why. And an example, a departmental discussion. How many departmental discussions actually draw on the literature, draw on the experience of others? If they do, and that departmental discussion is minuted, that for me constitutes a scholarship of teaching, because there's an engagement and a peer review about the processes of making learning possible. But we don't tend to call it that. I'm not sure why. The important thing about all this is that I'm not rejecting research into teaching and learning. I'm saying that's the area of overlap between the scholarship of teaching, which is mostly not about this, and the scholarship of discovery, which it mostly is about. It's investigations into teaching, where teaching is the focus of the discovery. And to make this easier to grasp, we've tried to look at 3 different ways in which this might be done. And I've got a table, and I'm going to illustrate this table with 3 videos, and I'll put the videos, I'll explain a bit about the videos each time. But this first level is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm informing myself about your response to what I'm doing in the lecture. When I'm seeing 3 of you, 4 of you nodding off down the back, I'm thinking, maybe I'm losing something here. Maybe I've lost the plot. This is personal knowledge for me. It's not something I want to publish. It's verified by me. It's something we do all the time in our activities. We do it every day. When we're walking across the street, we look to see if a car's coming. We verify it ourselves as to whether we're going to be hit or not. This is just good practice. Everybody does it in their profession. But it can get caught up in notions of research. And I'll illustrate this with a short video from the film Gosford Park.
All right, well, you tell me. Who is Ray Milland? Yeah, but no Clara Bow and no Jen. Excuse me, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Barnes, sir.
All right, Barnes. You ever go to the movies?
Yeah, sometimes go to the flicks.
You ever hear of Ray Milland?
Who?
Ray Milland? You ever
Never heard of him.
Thank you. I did research. Nobody ever heard of him. Yeah, well, you tell Sheehan I'll sign Milland, but it's Ixnay on the undead.
So you can see that's all it takes. Verified by himself. He's convinced, he's done research, he's convinced about that fact, and you move on. It's such an important thing we do all the time in our life. We never consult with our peers. But the next level requires us to do that. And this is, for me, at the heart of scholarship and teaching and learning, where the purpose of the investigation we're engaged in, and I'm not talking about research here, but the purpose of the investigation is in a shared context. It might be team teaching. It might be a departmental context. It might be students with the teacher. It might be a group of students even that are engaged in this. But the point is that the evidence gathered in that process is verified by the group themselves in that context. They're the only ones that need to be convinced that what you've found matters, and that constitutes local knowledge. It may or may not be important for other contexts. In many cases it won't be because it's contextually based. And the reason that that's important is acting upon that is where we get changes to the student experience. We don't have to go through the processes of publishing, peer review and so on. It's done in the departmental meeting. It's done in the team meeting. I'm going to illustrate this with two videos joined up. There's no break in between them other than you'll see the difference. The first one is setting a context for an educational activity. The second part is a person reviewing the process of evaluating that activity. And it's that evaluation process which constitutes this level of investigation.
Kanji learning is, many people agree, the most difficult part of Japanese learning by the alphabet-based or European language-based people. And that's where we have been, over the years, trying to find a method to let them overcome that difficulty. And then the root of that difficulty we identified as a mental transition from a sound-based writing system, which is alphabet, to the meaning-based writing system, which is kanji. So throughout the project, we kept that one in mind, how to overcome that difficulty.
Because the simulation runs in a simulation suite, we could observe the people participating. We used questionnaires so that at the end of the semester we'd ask the students what they thought the strengths and the weaknesses of that learning process were, what they liked, what they didn't like, how they'd improve it. We also used debriefing sessions in which we'd find out how things were going, what the issues were. We also used individual interviews with students, same sort of reason, and then more recently, actually partly through this court grant, we've had independent evaluations. One's the court process, and we've also had a research fellow at the university come and do an independent evaluation. So we get all that data, and then we get together as a group, that's the staff, plus the tutors who are often external to the university, so they're industry-based experts, to review that information to say, now, how do we have to change it?
That, for me, is a sort of inquiry that leads to changes, that leads to improvements in student learning almost immediately after that investigation. It's a very good example of the scholarship of learning and teaching. The context stayed within that group, but the focus was the students, not on publication. The final area, and this is where it does, this is where the overlap is between the scholarship of teaching and learning and the scholarship of discovery. The audience here is an international one. It's verified by those in that context. It's classic research scholarship of discovery. This video is taken from the film Copenhagen, where two physicists meet and talk about their experience.
First time I ever set eyes on you. One of those lectures I was giving in Göttingen.
What are you talking about?
You stood up and laid into me.
I offered a few comments.
Beautiful summer's day. Scent of roses drifting in from the garden. Rows of eminent physicists and mathematicians all nodding approval at my benevolence and wisdom. Suddenly up jumps a cheeky young pup and tells me my mathematics are wrong.
They were wrong.
How old were you?
20.
But the movie buffs among you may recognise a very young James Bond there, also known as Schrödinger? Heisenberg, I can't remember. Who was the physicist? Doesn't matter. Bohr's one of them, Schrödinger's the other one, I think. But you can get the point there. This is about peer review. This is about the public display to check the credibility of the thinking. Was there transparency in Bohr's mathematics? So what I've done is talk here about overlapping scholarships. I'm running out of time rapidly, so I'm going to move through this. But what you've seen, my definition of the scholarship of teaching and learning is illustrated more with level 2, and the overlap there comes with level 3. And then there are all sorts of other forms of scholarship of discovery as well. So my main points here really are that scholarship is not the same as research. It was never intended to be by Boyer, and I don't see it as being that. Personal investigation is a part of being scholarly. Making it public is the scholarship part. Investigation at level 2 is a defining element of the scholarship of teaching, always, but investigation at level 3 can be both. It's always a part of the scholarship of discovery, but it can be a part of the scholarship of teaching and learning as well. So, moving on to the second half rather rapidly, now that we know where we are, I'm going to address the second question, research-led teaching, and what is it? And I'm going to do this through the eyes of my own university's attempt to introduce research-led teaching. It has a policy, and the policy is that it's responsibility of the university to ensure that students work in an environment that has a number of elements. The contents of the programs of study have research in them. The development of inquiry-based learning, the process, has got research in it, and there is proactive engagement of staff and students in research into university teaching and learning. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the content first, I'd like to describe this to you in terms of the how and the what of teaching. The what of teaching, in theory, is the same as learning. That's what teachers set out to do, that what they're teaching, they're hoping their students will learn. Well, for me, that subject matter research is the content programs of study, and you've all experienced that. The development of inquiry-based learning is the how of learning. How students are going about their learning. Is that involving inquiry methods? Well, if it is, then that's where research relates to learning. The third area is the how of teaching. Investigations into the way teaching is conducted, and that's pedagogic research. At least that's what most people call it. So expanding on these quite quickly, we get to the point where subject matter research is a research outcome, and therefore the link between research and teaching is through that subject matter research. It can be the research that others have done, such as Einstein, Darwin, and we introduce that into our curricula. Our own research could also be introduced into our curricula as research-led teaching and learning. This is what always has happened over the years. We've built on research, but this is what's happening more, that our own research is becoming part of undergraduate programs in some cases, in many cases, in fact. So that's the what, and that's the link between research and teaching and learning. If we go to inquiry-based learning, well, we're really talking here about a research process. Research involves a high level, a high quality way of thinking. Why not let our students go down that path? Why not encourage them to engage in those sorts of processes? And we can use our own research processes here, or the research of others, the processes that they use. I would suggest both. An example of that would be problem-based learning. If we zip over to the other side now, we're talking about the how dimension of teaching. Here we're talking about pedagogue research as a research outcome. It can be the research of others, for example, John Biggs' work on constructive alignment, Graham Gibbs' work on assessment. Bringing that into our curriculum is one way of doing it. Another way is to use our own pedagogic research to engage in. John Biggs' work I've mentioned, our own might be analysing the student feedback results we get and changing our teaching as a result of that. Well, I've almost come to the end, but I think what I said before was that what most people think of as research-led teaching is in that middle column. It's usually now what the teachers do in their own research and bringing that into the curriculum. But what I've circled there on the right-hand side is that I think inquiry-based learning using the teacher's own research, in other words, having the students working with the teacher on his or her own research, is now the way that many universities are going, and many meaning about between 5 and 10 from my experience. But for example, whole first-year chemistry departments at Michigan are involving the students in the original research of the academic staff in some way, getting them to feel what the environment is for research and so on. So that's my message. All those key diagrams are in the paper that you've got. In summary, that I think pedagogic research, one's own and others, is the scholarship of teaching and learning, that form of inquiry I talked about. But subject matter research and inquiry-led teaching are not. But it doesn't matter. I mean, these are just names for me. What's important is that all three approaches to teaching are desirable as they're designed to enhance student learning. So in conclusion, I haven't finished yet. I've only summarised a part of it. All those things of one's teaching is a part, but only a part of the scholarship of teaching. That what I'm trying to get at is that the scholarship of teaching needs to be about the act of teaching. It's through the act of teaching that student learning happens. So the scholarship of teaching has got to be about the act of teaching in some way, and that's what I've tried to get at. And it's just one dimension of research-led teaching, but it's a vital one for student learning. So I will stop there. Thank you.